Hi there, Simon here. Devang and I are still enjoying a few weeks to have some R&R. While we are taking our annual tennis holes, let's take a look back to the mercurial Nick Kyrgios. Never far away from the spotlight, the lightning rod Australian has had a somewhat up and down 2023. When we looked at his career during the pandemic in 2020, we marveled at his brilliance and shook our heads at, what shall we say, his quirks? Anyway, enjoy, and we'll talk very soon.
Hello and welcome to the Open Era Podcast. My name is Devang Desai and I'm joined, as always, by Mr. Simon Bushell. Bush, it's episode 50, the half century. Congratulations, sir.
I raised my bat up to the terraces at Lord's Cricket Ground.
yeah.
There is some polite golf clapping going on as we reach the 50 mark. I do feel proud in a certain way. We managed to get there. I feel good about it.
As do I. We waited till 50 to just make this a straight up cricket tennis podcast. We all had it. We had it in mind for a while, but we waited to the half century to wave to the adoring crowd. But in all seriousness, to echo Bush's comments, massive thanks to those who have listened to us from episode 1 or are just picking it up now. It's meant a lot, and we love doing this show. But live tour tennis still a ways away. So this week, we cover maybe the final newsmaker of the pandemic, the voice of reason in a world of lunacy. Yeah, of course, I'm talking about Nick Kyrgios. Bush, that's how we've always known him, right?
Absolutely. And what a fascinating player, not just his on-the-court antics, but off the court as well. He's an amazing person to talk about in so many ways. Just the talent alone inside of the four lines of a tennis court is quite astonishing. So I'm excited to look back at some of the stuff that he's done, and we're specifically talking about his exploits in Mexico, which go down in history for an amazing tournament and a couple of amazing matches. But we'll also touch on some of the other things that have happened recently with him, with his comments surrounding some of the more idiotic and chaotic things that have happened around the ATP Tour and some of the ATP's biggest stars revolving around COVID-19.
To borrow a phrase from another sport we love, soccer, the shithousery Nick Kyrgios displayed in Acapulco is a legendary display of basically being the wrestling heel and winning and making everyone mad at him and loving it. And that's the Nick Kyrgios, I think, situation. It's a superb player on his day who can really take out the top guys and does not wilt when he does play the world number one, whether it be Novak or Rafa or Roger. But he's also a guy that probably loses matches you don't expect him to lose. And I think among the things that we'll also touch on, I think, is the fact that Nick Kyrgios is okay with not being the best. And it goes back to what we talked about in the Coco Gauff episode, Bush, because I think it's a rare thing for someone that good to admit that they're okay with being just that good and not needing to be great. You don't hear athletes talk that way.
No, you don't. And it's one of the more extraordinary parts about who he is as a person as well, that in a lot of ways, you can't really deny what his stance is on this thing, which is he's made a ton of money. He's in the top 50 in the world. He's had good runs at multiple Grand Slam levels. He's beaten pretty much everyone that he's come across. I think he hasn't beaten a player on inside of the top 20 at the moment, which is quite extraordinary for a player to just have not a winning record, of course, but has at least got a victory against everyone. And you mentioned it, of course, the thing that's really special about him is that he wants those matchups, right? He wants the Federer matchup. He wants Nadal. He wants Djokovic, and he doesn't shy away from it. And I think it is that alone which makes him one of the more fascinating characters on tour, because you hear all the time of players who want to stay away from those big three. He definitely does not.
So before we get to the tournament in Mexico last year, I think we mentioned Kyrgios is a lightning rod, and to be sure, I mean, there's no getting around it. I think tennis media as well, there's a dearth of stories that revolve outside of like the big three, Serena. There's like this weird mix of other stories that float around, and usually Kyrgios is picked out as like that main clickbait, pardon the phrase, but it's true, I think, right? Like Nick Kyrgios has written about anything that he does, whether it's on the court or off the court, but he didn't help himself in the earlier days or in 2018, in 2019, basically losing the plot on court a couple of times and really getting people angry with him, Bush.
I think there is a few sides of this as well. In 2018 was a tough year for him by most accounts. Injured, I think, for the first real time in his career, having some serious injuries. Also very openly struggling with his own mental health in terms of some of the things that were expected of him. Just the position that he was in life as well. And I think all of that sort of came to a head with him just not really caring a whole lot. And accusations of tanking were right around this time. And he's often been associated with that word specifically, maybe more so than anyone else in the history of the sport, we would say. And he's had some run-ins with chair umpires. Of course, you have the very famous scene of, I believe is it Mohamed Layani who's trying to give him advice on court, who's saying, Nick, I'm trying to help you here, which led to a bunch of hand-wringing and monocles being dropped.
The amount of, like, the vitriol, let alone at Kyrgios, like, not handling himself, I guess, well. Layani was, like, they're like, this... You just can't do this. And it was strange, but I feel like only Nick Kyrgios could involved in a situation like that, Bush, right? Like, I feel like it's a 1 in a million situation when you have an umpire pleading with a player. He is like involved with officiating. He's like asking him, just try a little harder. Everyone in the tennis world seems to be saying this to Nick Kyrgios.
And I do think there are some comparisons with him and Ernest Gulbis as well, just in terms of personality types and in terms of play style and all the other things. But I do think that there's a certain amount of this, which is, especially on the men's side, you tend to get two distinct categories of players or people who come up through and play the sport at a high level. You either get people who, one side of it, which is people who are desperate to succeed and will grind out anything, and their whole life revolves around this. They either came from nothing and they've made a living out of this. Or there's the other side of it, which is that it's often from very wealthy families. They like the sport, of course, but they're kind of happy with where they are and they see it as a living, especially if you're inside of the top 100. Kyrgios kind of sits somewhere in the middle of that, which is a very rare thing in tennis, right? Which is that it is important to him to a certain extent, but he's also spoken openly about how he wants to be a basketball player and how he wished he was as well. And it's not often that you find someone who is this extraordinarily talented, who really doesn't really give a damn about the sport that he's chosen to play. And it makes for a fascinating character, and one that I think oftentimes I think the ATP should do much more to embrace in a lot of ways, because there's some very, very vanilla personalities. And if you look at it through the lens of what I just said in those two particular camps, it does lead to some pretty bland personalities and some pretty bland sort of situations within the sport, which I think is in some ways is why Kyrgios, anything that he does gets magnified, is because the rest of the sport is quite boring, to be honest, especially on the men's side. I think the women's is a little different, but the men's side, certainly, it is a little dull. And outside of the big three, you can see why he is a figure that the ATP tries to elevate in some ways and puts his name into the headlights. I do think in some ways, just to round that out, it is quite similar to the NHL in some ways, right? That it is kind of boring, like the personalities of the players. And it is, for the most part, a fairly rich person's sport, or a very, 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 very working class sport in terms of hockey. It is, and I think there's certain parallels in terms of how the personalities come across.
100%. And I think they don't really need to do a better job of marketing him right now. And it goes back to that Racket article, Matt Willis's article we talked about a couple weeks ago, right? Where they're kind of resting on their laurels with the idea that Fed, Nadal, Joker, Serena are selling this game. And they don't really need to do much, but I think the writing is on the wall that they will have to very soon, if not already, because they're losing ground to other sports like F1. And Nick Kyrgios is that kind of guy where maybe he's not Lando Norris and he's streaming on Twitch, but he definitely does bring something else to the table that not many people do in tennis. It's a really interesting situation now as well, because I think out of the coronavirus pandemic and out of everything that's happened, very few tennis players have covered themselves well. And I don't think we would have guessed it'd be Kyrgios being one of them that did, or like spoke out forcefully about things that people believed in and people thought was right. So I think that's been great to see. But I think on this week's episode, we're going to go to a point where this is Nick Kyrgios at an amazing level tennis-wise, and it's also him at an amazing level as the character that I think We want tennis to embrace, but it is up to Nick as well to bring the goods with his game, and he definitely did that in Mexico, Simon?
No kidding. This is a extraordinary week, and I mentioned I hope you enjoyed reading through some of my notes, Devang, because I have my own
I did.
my own quips that sometimes I try and refer back to here. But every single match in this stupid tournament, and I say that in the most polite way possible because it looks like it's filmed underwater. This match, this tournament, with the way the camera's set up, makes it look like it was filmed at 3:00 in the morning through like an artistic, when you have like first year art students who are filming projects. It's like they put a filter over everything just to make it look a bit more spicy. Every single match in this tournament has a storyline that we could talk about for hours. And it's really funny that you have it lines up so perfectly that the players that he plays against and plays really, really well against, it's just awesome. And it's the kind of thing that you really hope, if tennis is to evolve and to make itself more accessible to people, this is the kind of week that you want to see more of.
100%. Disclaimer, I was listening to some NK clips beforehand, and I heard the commentators say Kyrgios a bunch, and I looked it up, and that is the correct pronunciation, but I've been saying Nick Kyrgios forever. So I've been trying to grapple with the idea that I've been saying it wrong and now trying to say it correctly. But if I do say Kyrgios from time to time, it is not intentional. I'm struggling here. So a mea culpa before we get into this push, but I think it's Kyrgios. I think it's Kyrgios.
Do I say it correctly? I have to check myself now. I feel like the British way of saying it is the correct way, but who knows?
You would say that, right? I think that's been the British Empire's modus operandi for quite a while.
Oh
right?
my goodness.
We're doing it the right way. We're doing it the right way.
I had to check myself before I say that again. I think that is a fair thing to say.
And the other thing, the court, I thought the court color is maybe the most beautiful I've ever seen on a hard court. Agree?
It looks like a swimming pool, doesn't it? It looks like that beautiful sort of blue ocean color that you see when you look out at a sparkling summer day on the Pacific Ocean.
It literally does. And the shading is perfect, and it does look like they're levitating on water, which a man from Australia basically did. When we come back after the break, it's the Acapulco run in 2019 from Nick Kyrgios coming up next on Open Era. Welcome back to the Open Air podcast. It's Nick Kyrgios at the Mexico Open in Acapulco, 2019 edition. Bush, I mean, it's a hell of a run. It's a hell of a lineup of players that Nick plays throughout. It's pretty wild.
It's incredibly wild. Let's just do a little bit more scene setting. I said that he was off the back of tanking and mental health problems and an injury that he suffered as well in 2018, which leads into 2019. He also chatted about how seeing the fight between Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury sort of gave him some impetus to get back and play a sport that he... I was going to say love, but that's really not true, is it? It's a sport that he is his professional career. Let's go with that instead, which leads into this tournament. And realistically, nothing is expected of him here. He's 72nd in the world. I think this is probably the lowest he's been in a long time. And the lineup of players that he has to play, the draw is not favorable to him at all. He has to get through Andreas Seppi in the first round, which is not an easy matchup at all. Before, of course, the hotly anticipated second round matchup before the tournament against Rafael Nadal, if it was going to take place. But also, this tournament's full of stars. Wawrinka's in this tournament. Isner's in this tournament. Sorry, he's not a star. Zverev's in this tournament. So there are players in this tournament that he has to get through in order to make a solid run here. But really, nothing is expected going into this tournament.
It's a good draw. Our friend John Millman is here. Steve Johnson, Francis Tiafoe, Alex de Minaur is here. Diego Schwartzman. Rafa Nadal, obviously the clear fan favorite. Most places he goes, but that's especially so in Acapulco at this tournament. Juan Martín del Potro would be a close second, but he was unable to defend his title from 2018. But it's a good field. It's a good field for not maybe the most high-profile tournament. It's one that you don't see every star circle on their calendar. Some of them always go. Rafa goes a lot. Sasha Zverev has gone since he's gone on the tour, but Kyrgios is still a draw, and I think as a wild card in this tournament, he's unseeded. He's kind of positioned in a place where he's supposed to be cannon fodder for Rafa in the second round, if he can get there, because Seppi's a a guy that can give people problems. I think in 2019, this is the swan song of Seppi really being maybe dangerous on any hard court. I think that might be being too generous to him even saying that, but they've had some good matches before, right, Bush? So it's not unquestionable to say that he might have some problems here.
No, and the pair met in Australia in 2015 and in 2017, and Kyrgios, lots and lots of problems. They shared 5-set wins each, and both of them are absolute epics that I would encourage you to go back and watch. Seppi, low-key, very good watch in a lot of ways. Just a really solid player who also has a flair for some sort of exciting creative moments on court as well. So they are a good matchup with each other. So both of those ones are sort of fresh in the memory, and this is probably Kyrgios' best performance in a long time in the first round against Seppi. He plays extraordinarily well, bangs down 13 aces, serves extraordinarily well, and sort of dispatches him in an hour and 15 minutes. And if you look around some of the reports from this time, lots of people basically saying that this is as good as Kyrgios has looked in a long, long time. So big confidence building win. And going into the second round matchup with Rafael Nadal, the one that everyone has circled in the calendar. And Devang, there is history between these two. And I think it's fair to say that these two do not like each other a hell of a lot.
That is very fair. You mentioned Kyrgios is coming in, like his star is falling low, but the name he had made for himself, at least to this point on the tour, was a guy that was taking out big guns seemingly when they were at their best, and Rafa Nadal was one of them. The way it went down, contentious, I think you could say, Simon, and that led to some animosity that just continued to linger, it felt like.
And I think this also stems back from that first Wimbledon matchup when Kyrgios, of course, took Rafael Nadal out. And if you look at sort of babyface Nick, back in 2014, maybe? That long ago? I think it was 2014, right? They played each other when he took Nadal out. I'm not sure Nadal particularly likes the antics. I'm not sure he likes the flair on court. And I've come around a lot on Rafael Nadal, and I think he does. I think he's a very good person and a very good guy. But I think there is a little bit of a stick up the backside when it comes to Kyrgios in particular. And I think there might just be a little bit of a blind spot when it comes to this dude is basically a clown, right? And sorry, a clown is the wrong word. This guy is basically a troll, and you're being trolled by the person, and that's exactly what they want you to do. It should be noted coming into this match, Kyrgios likes playing in Mexico, and especially likes being in Acapulco. There is pictures around this time of him going to have some drinks. There is chat going into this match that he has a bit of food poisoning. I'm not speculating where that came from. There is some pictures around there of him being on a jet ski. So I'm just saying that he is enjoying the lifestyle of being at this tournament. Perhaps not what you want coming up against the most professional grinder of all time.
But you know what? I think a lot of guys probably went in with that mindset where they didn't sleep the night before when they had to play a Roger or Rafa or Novak. They're super nervous. They're like, I'm playing one of the greats. I'm going to be so tight. Like, this is not going to go well for me, but I'm going to try my best. And they overthink it and they outthink themselves. And I don't think Nick Kyrgios was going to do that. I think this is a player that is spotted at pubs near tournaments that he's at on a pretty regular basis, including Wimbledon. Like, I think that this is a guy that has found an equilibrium where he's happy treating the game as he does when everyone else is not. And when everyone else is not happy, it's usually because they see glimpses of Kyrgios like they do in this second round matchup against Nadal, which I think from beginning to end is probably one of the better hardcore matches from 2019. The atmosphere, Bush, absolutely electric. We've talked about some matches in these lookbacks over the past few weeks and months. But have 2001 Wimbledon being an absolute ultimate highlight. But atmosphere-wise, this was just electric charge, so good.
Off the charts good, this one is. It's one of those that we always call out tennis for being stuffy and all over the place. If we could just have more crowds and more tournaments like in Acapulco, I think we'd probably do fairly well. Boisterous, colorful, electric, any adjective you want to use to describe what this crowd is like, you can have it all. One of the best crowds I have heard for a match in a very long time. Obviously, they love Rafa, but they hate Kyrgios. They hate him. It's amazing. The boos and the whistles, the white hankies, everything you could possibly want from a Mexican crowd, from a Latin crowd, born of the sort of football fandom that's bought into a tennis arena. It's on the coast. Everyone's there to have a good time, have a few drinks, enjoy some very high-class tennis. And this is an amazing match between these two.
Nadal led the head-to-head 3-2 heading into this match, and he's fresh off of a absolute demolition in Beijing. I think, maybe not fresh off is the wrong word, but I think that the Beijing final, it's in 2017, it's a measuring point. I think Nadal has something to prove as well with that loss at Wimbledon still in his mind from a few years ago, but at this point, it's Nadal, the clear favorite. I don't think the first set does anything to dissuade that notion. It's Nadal being just better than Kyrgios by a far margin in the first set, which looks pretty textbook. I mean, nothing shocking from what I saw.
No, me neither. I do think in this first set, the thing that stands out for me is that Kyrgios can rally with him. And it's very, very rare to see someone who is not afraid to trade blows with Nadal from the back of the court. And Kyrgios just possesses such easy power off both wings. And we always talk about weapons, don't we? And I think this is true across most sports. Like, what is it that elevates you as an athlete or as a team or as an individual above everyone else or as a coach in a lot of ways? What is that one thing that separates you? And Kyrgios has like 15 of them. I think that's the thing that makes people pull their hair out about him, is that he can play any way that you want him to play, and he can do it at a level that's better than most players in the world.
Which one of them is your favorite of his, Bush? Because I have one by a mile. If I could choose one of those 15, I know what I would choose.
I think on the run ability to create power is one of my favorite things I've ever seen on a tennis court. Just watching someone who's pulled out wide just unleash like 105-mile-an-hour forehand out with no backswing. Like, that's not normal. You shouldn't be able to do that. It's just incredible to watch.
Yeah, that's a great shout. I think the serve is a great shout. That serve is it's a rocket. But I love his touch. I love the slice he attempts to put on balls. I like the shots he tries to create with spin. I think it's something rare from a power player like he is, like someone who can hit absolutely through the court, also has obscene hands that he can do pretty much whatever he wants with a tennis ball. And to have that ability is something else.
I think the best comp, and I know this is going to sound silly, and I think it's because I have the NBA on my brain, but best comp in terms of another sport is someone like Anthony Davis, like someone who should be just a power monster, just crushing people and does that routinely, but also just has such soft hands, such ability to work around the basket, can shoot three-pointers, can do just about everything, but is just the size of him and the athlete that he is just completely trounces people in just a raw power way. And I think that is kind of how I would summarize what Nick Kyrgios is as well. Just the touch that he has alone is amazing. And I always come back to that point because I think it's very funny in the Laver Cup when Nadal and Federer are talking about him and saying that he reads the game really well. I think he does. I think he just has such a natural ability on the court to understand where the ball is and to know how to hit an aggressive shot or a winning shot. Not necessarily aggressive, but a winning shot in a point. And that's not only God-given talent, but that is just a natural understanding of the game and an enormously high IQ level for the sport of tennis.
With all that being said, it's looking especially grim after the first set because he's down to Nadal, but he's also taken a medical timeout. He mentioned the food poisoning, quote unquote. He said he took some tablets the physio gave him, which made him feel woozy. He was also dealing with a knee injury. It's a medical timeout after the first set. Chances are he could retire. The commentators seem to be predicting he'll retire, but he doesn't. He comes back out for the second set to give the fans a show maybe they didn't want to see because he's not going away at all. And I think you get an idea of how serious the second set's going to be when Kyrgios unleashes a drop shot with the hubris that you maybe need to confront a man like Rafael Nadal on a stage like this.
You know when you're playing sport and you see a shot in your mind and you think, wow, I can do that. You have that sort of split second moment, like whatever sport you're playing, you're thinking, goodness me, that's there for me. I can do it. and then you try it and it spectacularly fails and you're like a complete idiot. It's like Kyrgios has that every single shot that he hits, except he makes all of them. That's the crazy thing. And the one that you're talking about, he gets dragged out wide. And the correct shot is just to play a slice shot, middle of the baseline, recover and get back to the middle of the court. Not play a drop shot, a sort of reverse hand drop shot cross court for a straight winner. I mean, it is the right shot, isn't it? Because he wins the point. So maybe I'm a fool here.
Right. And with the nonchalance as he's pulling it off as well, just adding to the perfection of the image, the Rafa's incredulity as he's watching this unfold. But he's not going away and then some by holding his serve and getting into some Nadal service games. But I think the underarm serve bush is probably the biggest talking point as well before we get to the tiebreak. Rafa's standing 9,000 feet behind the baseline. We've been pleading for people to do this more often. Makes sense. I know it's controversial, but damn, it makes sense.
How is it controversial, Devang? How did this ever become a story?
Because this sport is stuck in 1998 or wherever they want to be. That's how. But I know.
I always think it's funny when people talk about like how all the stuff around Kyrgios. He likes to go to bars and likes to go in drinking and enjoys the party life. What do you think happened in all of these team sports in like the 70s and the 80s? They weren't choir boys.
Paragons of virtue, Simon. I'll have no stunder directed to the greats of the game of yesteryear.
What do you think Andre Agassi was doing? Silly stuff. More underarm serving.
And hey, again, if you want to stand that far back and you want to get into a point against someone with Nadal's ability, I think you could try to give yourself every advantage you can. So he does it there. That's also a revelation. Now the crowd is out for blood. I think they took that underarm serve bush as a personal affront, it seemed. Like they would be targeted by the Australian, but it's a banger of a set, and we get to a banger of a tiebreak in which Nick Kyrgios looks fantastic. Up relatively early, but it's a big result. He wins the tiebreak, and he busts out one of the best air guitar celebrations we've seen in some time. It's a good moment.
It is. It's a great moment.
The comeback is well and truly on. Nick Kyrgios has found a way to turn this set in his favour when he was as close as you can be to walking out of the stadium when he was a set down. He saved 4 break points and he's dominated the tie break. We're going all the way in Acapulco.
Crowd angry, like, wow, we got to stay around for this. What is this? Who is this guy? Kyrgios busting out the air guitar, basically making the "you can't go home" sign, and the camera contrast level going from bright to dark, court being maybe 20% to 25% visible with the darkness. It's all great. It all makes for great cinema. It's fantastic.
It does. It's actually really, really unique going back and watching the highlights of this, because you expect just to see just a normal looking tennis court, and then just watching this in particular, there's a very compact feel to it. There's a very enclosed, sort of suffocating feel that this court has, and just everything about it. And just these two are the perfect gladiators to play against each other, and they match up so well, personality and style-wise. I think that's, out of the matchups, obviously I would take number one is Kyrgios against Federer, because they're just, some of the matches they've had, their Laver Cup encounters have been incredible. I think watching him play against someone who is so solid as Djokovic and just hitting through the all-time greatest wall of all time is another wonderful feeling to watch. But this one against Nadal, he has to work really, really, really hard. And Nadal's not going to give him anything. And I think that's what makes all three players so different in their styles. And there isn't that many players in the world. And I would challenge anyone to sort of answer this question of how many players in the top 100 in the world can beat all three of these players the way that Kyrgios can. There's not that many of them. You would argue someone like Wawrinka could do it. You would argue someone like Delpo could do it. And then you're kind of running thin. Sorry, Dennis Millman, of course. Dennis Millman? David Millman?
John Millman, right? No, Dennis Millman. Gee, John Millman. My goodness. Sorry to good friend of the show, John Millman. My God. Stan put together some of these runs where he literally lights out. and at the highest level of being able to hit winners from very bad positions because they constantly put in bad positions by these three guys because that's what they excel at. But you're right. I mean, it's a very short list. Current players, even a couple years ago, I think Nalbandian, as we went into in depth, got lightning in a bottle in a good moment in time to take all three out. But it's a very, very short list. And I think we're glossing over what's happening before these tie breaks, but just to stay in these sets against a Nadal that's playing well. I would not say this is Nadal playing poorly. I think it's a really good match from both players. And the third set, I mean, as expected, we get this buildup of an amazing second set and a big culmination in the tiebreak for Kyrgios. It's a bunch of the same in the third set, toe to toe, big shots, not a lot of room in between either player. Another tiebreak. And honestly, Bush, I think I mentioned this a bunch of times here, but like Rafa Nadal to me is the most impressive competitor. He's one of those players that you really have to earn, I guess, what you're going to get. He's not going to give anything to you, which is a massive cliche, but I think that it's Nadal to a T. I don't know what the hell happens here, honestly. I think this match is done and dusted watching it again. Like, it should have been over.
It's astonishing that he doesn't win the match. He's up 6-3. He has match points. This is Nadal speaking. The crowd is fired up. They're all over the place and ready to celebrate a big win for favorite player and everything. And I think Kyrgios got so annoyed, just so angry at the histrionics Nadal gets to get to match point. I mean, he gives it such a big one, to use the British phrase. He is fist pumping like crazy, waving to the crowd, waving the arms and everything. And what follows through the next sort of 5 minutes as a period is one of the most entertaining and funny moments I've seen on a tennis court, because everything that a troll could possibly think up of doing. And imagine the worst troll that you know. Imagine that the blue check mark or the egg on Twitter. The deepest troll who also happens to be one of the most talented tennis players of all time. That's basically what happens here.
First match point, Kyrgios hits one of the most insane volleyed winners I think we've ever seen. With, again, that nonchalance, like, I do this every day, not a big deal. Arrogance that leaves everyone in awe. You get an amazing death stare from Rafa Nadal, kind of checking himself and also realizing that Kyrgios has no regard for human life. As our friend Kevin Harlan once said, like, it's a ridiculous shot. It's the audacity to try it when you're going to lose. I think he's totally fine with losing as well, which is why he tries that.
Yeah, and this is all off the back, of course, of him bashing down an ace to get to 6-4, which is called back by the chair umpire, because Nadal, being what Nadal does, is he takes his time. He takes his sweet time. He puts the hand up and says that he's not ready. And by the way, he was clearly ready. But that's a different story in its entirety. And Kyrgios is furious. He berates the umpire. He smashes his racket on the ground, sort of anyway, between the first and the second serve. He then goes very, very slowly to pick up a new racket from his bag. And I mean extraordinarily slowly, just to fully hammer home the point to Nadal about time wasting. It looks like, the Charlie Brown slow walk back to the chair, or, when you're in school and they say,
yeah,
go and do that thing. And you're like, oh, I don't want to, so I'll go and do it as slowly as possible. This is exactly what Kyrgios does here. And Nadal is so angry. He's staring straight through him.
To change your racket, again, he's down a match point and he's faulted once. To change your racket at that point, I mean, you're just showing. Like, I frankly don't care. Like, I don't think he gives a damn. And it's known to everyone in attendance. It's known to people watching. It's an amazing moment. He comes back, gets the point with another volleyed winner. I think you could call it a lucky shot. It hits the tape and lands on the line. It's a hilarious moment again, because at this point, maybe Nadal is beginning to doubt that it's meant to be for him, which you rarely get to see from the Spaniard, right? It's a really rare occurrence. At 6-5, Nadal makes an error.
He double faults. It's one time in my, I think the list on my hand is very short of the times I can remember Nadal completely being shook. And I think this is it here. He completely loses the plot. And It's very, very strange. Maybe the atmosphere and the player that he's playing against, but he dumps a second serve right at the bottom of the net. It's nowhere near close. And what follows is Kyrgios plays a very standard point and steals a win and goes absolutely insane.
Second serve, match point. It's long, and it is incredible. An unbelievable victory for Nick Kyrgios. How on earth has he achieved it? Who knows? Nadal, desolate. Kyrgios, emphatic, delirious. Boos from the crowd. Cheers as well. But the most extraordinary performance from both of these players. Most of the fans on their feet to applaud an incredible night that no one here will ever forget. And Kyrgios, incredibly, has won 3-6, 7-6, 7-6.
Got to love just audible boos raining down following the end of a match. I love it. I love when it happens in tennis. Something has gone wrong. It's usually for the better in terms of entertainment or the spectacle. This is definitely it. Nadal the handshake for one thing after the match, one of the most curt that we've seen. Nadal desperately not wanting any part of it. He's quoted after the match saying, quote, "I don't think he's a bad guy, not at all. I think he's a good guy, but what he lacks is a little respect for the public, for his rival, and also for himself. I think he should improve that. Today we have to say congratulations. He was good and he won." It's classic Rafa. He's like, "You're a terrible human being. You disgust me. You play well today. Shouts to you. Great job, man. But you yourself, you disgust me. I hate you."
Also, I don't think he did anything wrong. I really don't in this match alone. Yeah, I know the thing at the end can probably wind you up a little bit, but you got to see it from his perspective as well. Nadal makes a living of winding players up by taking 90 seconds between points. And for someone to actually do it back to him, it's the ultimate cathartic moment if you're a hater of that sort of behavior on court. And the end of that, to hear the boos raining down, it is very much, and here come the pretzels from that Simpsons episode, where they're just lobbing things. It looks like a WCW ring back in the 90s, where people are like lobbing trash into the middle of the ring. Exactly. It would be excused to think that this wasn't a tennis match.
If we saw Kurt Hennig walking around the center court there in Mexico, I wouldn't have been shocked, because it did feel like a 90s WCW crowd. Credible scenes. I mean, I think Nadal he didn't double down, but I think he tried to clarify by saying, like, think about the children, what an example Kyrgios sets, and it's a good one for the kids, because kids are like this, man. These are what kids are like. Like, I think people have to understand that this is what people are like now, and I think not everyone is going to be the big three or reach the stratosphere of the big three, and I think it's hard for guys like Rafa to see that. I think that's the issue in the way they look at someone like Nick.
Also, Devang, a line from his quote, "One of the best things our generation have with me, Roger, and Novak was always respect for each other." For Novak? Really?
Like, what are you talking about? What
Really?
are you talking about? Yeah. Sure, man. Sure. So we go from a shocker against Nadal into another big match against Dan Wawrinka, who we mentioned before. Nick Kyrgios, obviously, he's a lightning rod. He's done many things. He's done bad things as well. I think he's done stupid things. He's done offensive things. I think this is an example of one of them, Bush, with Stan.
Yeah, and I don't know how much we want to dive into the Wawrinka storyline. It probably deserves its own sort of mini episode in itself. But effectively, the background is that Kyrgios has said some vulgar things, which a microphone picked up. I don't really want to repeat it because I don't want to get us banned from the internet. Effectively, these two don't like each other a hell of a lot. And I think that an underrated and a low-key thing that needs to be said about Wawrinka is also quite lippy himself. And Kyrgios does speak to this as well. It is kind of known that Wawrinka does say a few things on court as well and is known to piss off quite a few people. And I think if you're going to sort of have that sort of behavior on court, there's one player in the world who is going to be probably giving it back to you and more some. The fact also that Nick Kyrgios is Australian and the sort of legacy of sledging as well that comes out of that, the sporting culture as well. Probably the worst person to pick a fight with on a tennis court.
So after that incident, that Stan had with Kyrgios, Wawrinka, kind of echoing what you hear a lot of in terms of the elder statesmen on the tour, or the respected statesmen on the tour, saying, quote, "I just hope the ATP takes big measures against him. He's young, but that's no excuse. Every match he behaves very badly. The problem is he doesn't just behave badly towards himself, he behaves badly towards the people around, the other players, the ball kids, the umpires. I really hope the ATP will take major action against him this time." So that's the background between him. Again, it's just like schoolyard stuff, talking about girlfriends and other players on the tour, stupid stuff that was caught on a mic near the court during a Canadian Open event. So that adds to the animosity as we get to this quarterfinal encounter in Acapulco. It's a great match, Bush. I mean, it's tight, super tight, more tie breaks, two guys who can hit the piss out of the ball, and we love to watch that.
Great match. Another one you should try and find a way to watch again if you can do. I believe it's all on Tennis TV at the moment, so do yourself a favor and check these two. I mean, these two, whenever they play each other or whenever each of them plays, are good watching, just the way they hit the ball so cleanly off either wing. Kyrgios wins, is resoundingly booed at the end of this match. The pretzels continue to rain down at the end of this one, and it isn't really a surprise, but he's fully embraced the villain role at this point. And a huge win, honestly, a huge win, and one that I think he built upon the confidence that he gained out of that Nadal win against a player who was coming back into form. I think Wawrinka had an underrated second half of his 2019, and also had an underrated Australian Open at the start of 2020 as well. So he's a player that can still play at the top level, and Kyrgios to get this win here is an enormous achievement.
I thought it was pretty shocking when Kyrgios spray painted NWO on the body of Stan Wawrinka before leaving the court. I don't know if that was called for, but I mean, this is the new world order, right? So
yeah, well, I expected it, I have to say. I saw the swerve coming, so we can't really be surprised about it. Hey, Devan, can I queue up the semi-final? Because I have some things I'd like to say about this.
Please note to our listeners as well what I just want to note before I read Simon put the notes together for this episode, and I had probably the best laugh I've had in some time, because it's a good entry and it's been some bleak times, so you need laughter in your life, but this was good.
Well, when we talked about this episode, I feared that it might run a bit long, and then I saw who Kyrgios played in the semi-final and the final, and after some of the events that have happened over the past week, I figured it was a good time that we can just. Certain people have been cancelled from this podcast, and I think rightfully so. So in the semi-final, Kyrgios plays against John Isner, and that's the end of that. Isner loses, Kyrgios wins, and we can move on to the final, where he plays Alexander Zverev.
An absolutely demo Sasha Zverev, 3 and 4. I don't think Sasha Zverev really touches Kyrgios here. I think there's a sign of, again, it's my favorite word, but the audacity. Kyrgios is up, love 40, triple match point. They're just basically trading blows on the baseline. A hilariously needless tweener mid-rally. That it's basically a lob. Loses the point. Zverev crestfallen, no reaction. He's like, please stop bullying me, man. It's the ultimate contrast of styles. You're like, he's not even close. It's Kyrgios all day. It's another reaction that I think we loved by the end of this tournament, by the end of this rewatch. Everybody hated Nick, but we liked him a lot. And he's the champion in 2019.
Watch out, world! Nick Kyrgios caps off a sensational week with a tremendous effort tonight to take the title in Acapulco.
Watch out, world. It's a hilarious call. And that commentator said Kyrgios, so I think it was an American versus Aussie pronunciation. That was the 2019 Mexican Open. Nick Kyrgios champion, iconoclast, the man everyone loved to hate, beat some huge names and showed everyone once again, for maybe the 100th time, that he's got everything. He's got all the shots in the bag. But it's that other stuff possibly that is more interesting, and it's what Simon and I are going to touch on following the break when we finish up this episode of Open Era. Welcome back to the Open Era podcast. It's the Nick Kyrgios episode. Long time coming. Simon, there's not been a lot of tennis that's non-exhibition or UTS or whatever that's been going on. There's not a lot of it. I think the big story, obviously, in the tennis world has been the players and how they've handled themselves during the pandemic, and that brings us to Nick and Zverev and Dominic Thiem and Novak Djokovic. And I think I'll let you begin, because basically where this starts is with Kyrgios rightfully calling these guys out, right?
He absolutely does. And we have mentioned on this podcast previously the stark contrast that exists between how the women on the WTA side and how the men on the ATP side have handled this, and the various different directions you could argue those two tours have gone in, certainly from their ambassadors and how they've handled themselves, not least Corey Goff, Bianca Andreescu and Naomi Osaka, about some of the things they've spoken out about and been so wonderful and eloquent in how they've spoken about big social issues. The opposite cannot be said for the ATP side. We had a nice long diatribe and soapbox episode about Novak Djokovic, about how we expect a hell of a lot more from him being the president of the Players' Council and also a global figure, just the people that he chooses to associate with, charlatans, con men, and also dangerous individuals who spread anti-vaxxing lies. Kyrgios took some time to take aim at Sasha Zverev, who he beat in the final, as we just touched upon, in Acapulco. So Zverev is an interesting one, right? So Zverev goes to the Aria Tour event that Djokovic hosts. He ends up contracting. He ends up contracting the virus, and he's supposed to be in self-isolation. Then it turns out that he is seen on an Instagram live post where he is effectively partying with other individuals when he's supposed to be in self-isolation. This causes Kyrgios to take to Instagram Live himself and brand Sasha Zverev as selfish. And I'm actually going to read his quote because I think he sums it quite nicely. I'm not going to do the Australian accent. I see more controversial things happening around the world, but one thing that stuck out to me was seeing Sasha Zverev again, man. Again, how selfish can you be? How selfish can you be? If you have the audacity to put out a tweet that you made for your management effing right on your behalf, saying that you're going to self-isolate for 14 days and apologizing to the general public for putting their health at risk, at least have the effing audacity to stay inside for 14 days. My God, the tennis world is pissing me off. Seriously, how selfish can you get? Seems reasonable to me. I don't disagree with him.
I mean, you could apply it. I don't think you need to limit that to coronavirus. That last quote. I think just in general, the tennis world's pissing me off. Seriously, how selfish can you all get? Full stop about anything generally.
How copy pasta has become an integral part of the sporting world, right? It feels like this could be just translated into anything. You know, you could probably insert Jeff Bezos' name into this and be fairly accurate in terms of just different effects of people being selfish in today's world.
So you had even backlash to these comments by Nick Kyrgios, which many people agreed with. I think his sentiment was held by many, including us here on this show. But not everyone agreed. I think Dominic Thiem was someone that voiced his support for Sasha Zverev, basically saying that certain opinions from Australia are unnecessary, referencing Nick. It's funny, Simon, because we talk about post-2019 for Kyrgios after Acapulco, and there's a string of like stupid events with Nick that like highlight some of the less good moments. There's the incident in Miami with a spectator, in which he somehow underarm serves and an altercation with a spectator are mentioned in the same breath. Like they're the same things. They're not at all. Like they're not a thing. He's smashing rackets. He gets into a huge issue in Rome, again with the alliance person at Wimbledon. Does not really give us what we wanted to see against Nadal in a rematch. Get 4 great sets, but I think we wanted something a little more. And then I don't know what the hell happened in Cincinnati, Simon. That is probably the lowest moment for Kyrgios, both on and off the court in recent memory.
Yeah, and also it comes off the back of Kyrgios calling various members of the ATP corrupt as well, which leads to the place that we ended up with going into 2020 and the probation period that he suffered. I have to say, I don't necessarily think the ATP is entirely corrupt, but I can sort of see in some capacity where Kyrgios is coming from on this one. Just, he he's not wrong, honestly, about the governing body in a lot of ways, but he's also a bit of an idiot and a bit of a douchebag. So it's a weird scenario to end up in. I personally think that his position in the sport and just the fact that he has to be the one making these points does a disservice to the fact that I think he's making good points. I think if anyone else makes the points that he makes, then it probably is treated with a little bit more respect. And I think that's the unfortunate part about when someone like that makes some of the comments that he makes. And I think overall he wants good for the game. He wants well for the sport. I think it's sad that someone like that is targeted and gets some of the vitriol directed at him that he does.
That's why I want to kind of mention what happened at the end of 2019. As we mentioned, Kyrgios coming off as a good soldier in this fight against coronavirus and speaking truth to power. Like, it's not all good. It's just simply not. I think we are plagued, especially in the tennis world, with easy judgments, and the judgments that have been piled on Nick forever have for the most part been inane and ridiculous to me, and people trying to fill time, which I get they have to do during the fortnight or 2 weeks of whatever major. It's always at least a couple of days of, oh, it's Nick Kyrgios, like, you never know, and he's got all the shots, and will he put it together? People love that stuff. I get it. He's a tantalizing talent, but I think there's so many different sides, and I think the most endearing sides that I'm ready to reckon with how I feel is I think I like the fact that he's not necessarily obsessed with being the best. I think that is super endearing, and I like the fact that he will call out players on a tour where I think a big problem is everyone is afraid to really say what they feel. Simon, I don't know if you agree, but I think this idea that the ATP is corrupt, I think the ATP is so inundated with handshake agreements and backroom negotiations between people that no one is ever saying how they actually feel about anything. So we get to these points where no one knows what the hell's going on, whether it be how they divvy up prize money or what they do with the lower ranked players when there's no play going on, or should there be a US Open. No one has any idea because there is just a complete breakdown of honesty. And maybe Nick Kyrgios is not going to fix everything, but at least he's not like the rest of these guys, because I'm sick of it.
I agree with you entirely. I think the idea, you need someone sometimes to speak truth to power. And I think sometimes there is a scenario that you get into where it's all just a little bit too comfortable and everyone is all just a little bit too nervous to ever raise their hand and raise up points that are necessary. And I think if you get into that scenario and you feel like people know things are wrong and are too scared to do anything about it, then you're never going to have any resolutions and you're never going to have things change in a positive way. And I always think there is a side of that exists in wider society as well, which is that some people will come up with extreme views. And I think there is a place for that in a certain capacity. And that's when it gets into really thin and dicey situations, because you're like, how far that goes does affect people's lives. I don't think it does in the tennis world. I think in a wider society, it probably does more so in tennis. In the tennis world, I think probably it's just making a few sponsors very nervous. And the more sponsors that are nervous, the more happy I am. So I think that's probably fine in the grand scheme of things.
To quote that line from a famous movie when he says, "Is this your king?" This is our king for this moment. For this moment, yeah, I'm also pretty shocked. But I think very few people emerged from this moment that we live in well in the tennis world, especially on the men's side. And I think NK might be one of them. But it's not all easy. I think you'd be the first to admit it hasn't been a straight road. I think you're seeing someone grappling with the idea of being a professional athlete in very open ways. You're seeing Stefano Tsitsipas maybe do it as well, I think. Mm-hmm. And the more insight to this, I think will show people what it means or what it takes and how kind of bizarre this whole thing is. And bizarre in the way I mean, like, it's effed, man, to not swear. Like, it's a lot. It's a lot on people. And I think the fear I also have, Bush, and I don't know about you, is like when we drive people like this away, like we challenge Kyrgios, we're like, oh man, like take it more seriously, blah, blah, blah. Like we risk driving them away from the sport and keeping it kind of the same it was.
Well, that is the thing. And I think it's one thing that I'd like to touch upon, because I don't think we spoke about how good he really is, right? During the course of this episode. And this is one thing that I'd like to conclude upon, is that there is such a rush to tell him how to be, and such a rush to tell him that you have to act and play in this way. I think he's pretty damn good. I think he plays pretty damn well, and maybe it doesn't fit the mold of what you want to be, but honestly, screw you. Like, let the dude play tennis in a way that really is revolutionary in a lot of ways, because not that many players play like him, if any, in the history of the sport. And that's the only way that it ever gets pushed forward, because I know it sounds corny, but out there is some kid, probably from a minority background as well, which we didn't touch on this episode, but Kyrgios also comes from that background as well, who is going to want to hit the ball like him, and is going to want to play creative trick shots, and is going to want to entertain. And the more people that we attract to come into the sport that play like that, the better, because it's not like this guy is a mug or a muppet. He's probably one of the most talented players to ever pick up a tennis racket. And that's the best thing I could ever say about him.
I think that might be a great point to leave it on. Nick Kyrgios is a guy that will play a huge part in where tennis goes from here as well. And excited, I think we both are, to see where that exactly is. Because who the hell knows right now? A lot of things are up in the air. Simon, anything else we missed? I know it's a lot to pack in, and he's someone we're going to talk about again for sure. But anything else before we leave?
I'm fully on the boat, and I don't know if you are, and it's one that we'll put out to our listeners. I do think he should have more impact in the actual governance of this sport. And I know it sounds silly, and it's, a reactionary take and all that sort of stuff, but you could do worse, right? You could do worse than having that voice in the room, in the Players' Council. You could do worse than having someone like that who legitimately gives a damn, right? He gives a damn about people first and foremost. Less about the sport, perhaps, but more so about the people. And I think there is a position for someone like that in the room. And I think it's nice to have a balancing act, because you've also got to, especially in the world, I mean, let's not forget that we do live in a capitalist society, so there still has to be thoughts to sponsorships and growing of the tour. But I think at a personal level, and at a level of a human being level, you could do a lot worse than having him in the room to make some of these points as well. And I don't think he should be shunned for that. I think you should embrace them, or risk it becoming more of an issue down the road.
He's been pretty consistent in 2020. I mean, the Australian bushfires, which definitely feel like they happened 20 years ago, not 6 months ago, but that was this year, and Nick Kyrgios led the charge to help his country and help his countrymen via tennis, via the Australian Open. He was one of the main guys, so he's been doing good for a while. It's good to see. It's a complicated guy who isn't, man.
One final thought just to close on this, because it always gets brought up, and I know it's a silly one, but it always gets asked to me. For some bizarre reason, anytime I talk about Nick Kyrgios with anyone who is not a tennis fan, they always ask me one question about him. Will he ever win a Grand Slam? And you know how much we love predictions on this show. Do you think we see it in the next 10 years of him being on tour, whether he actually does potentially post Big Three world, that he's raising one of those trophies, assuming, of course, that tennis comes back and is continuing to be played?
With the caveat that there are no major rule changes in tennis within these years, I say no.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's probably a good place to say about it. I think unless there is pretty substantial change in the way that tennis operates, I don't see him winning a Grand Slam. Not with the competition that's out there, and not with the level of consistency that is required to win 7 matches in a row over 5 sets. I don't see it.
Well, there you have it. Open Era, fully on board. Change the rules. Change the damn rules, and let's get Nick Kyrgios a couple of slams, because we want to see it. All right. That is this week for Open Era. We on patreon.com/Open Era, $3 a month. A massive help for us to keep this show going, keep the lights on. Massive thank you, as always, to producer extraordinaire Dylan Wilson on the ones and twos. You can find us on Twitter at Open Era Pod. Questions, comments, dropping some really cool stuff with the social team throughout the week. Awesome content. It's been really cool to see. And we'll talk to you soon. We're getting into August. Tennis, knock on wood, we'll be back soon. And we'll talk to you soon.